Hi, my name is Mildly Gothic, and I'm turning myself into Morticia for Halloween. This video is the process on getting started on doing that. Before I do, I want to explain a little bit about why I picked what dress I'm trying to do. So honestly, the idea for becoming Morticia started when I was watching Wednesday, because in that she has one very specific stunning dress that is this one. I'll put it on screen, and I fell in love with the red and black mixing in that dress. You don't typically see that in Morticia, but I thought that was really, really pretty. However, I don't like the characterization of Morticia in Wednesday. I just think they've missed the mark on a lot of the beats of her character, and so I feel weird recreating a version of a character that I don't like. So instead, I'm going to do what I think is probably one of my more favorite, and arguably the one that just I remember better, which is the 90s Addams Family movie Morticia. I am specifically looking at her dress. There's a couple different pictures, but the one I'm obsessed with is the dress from the tango scene she does with Gomez. It's super sparkly, it's super pretty, and I kind of want to make these two dresses blend together. The sparkly is, if you watched my last little I'm stressed, why I gave you that little tidbit of how this fabric might give you a clue. So what I'm going to do is more than I've ever done before. I'm planning on doing a full corset under construction for this dress. It is going to be fully lined. It's going to be a mermaid flare. I'm strongly debating putting a slit in the dress because I think it'll be really pretty and also help me walk and move in it. And I would like to be able to move in this costume. I'm pretty sure it's a bit in some of the animated things where she just kind of like tiptoes around. I like to walk, so I would like to try to actually still be able to do that. But at the minimum, it's going to be a mermaid dress. I'm not entirely sure if I want to do that yet. I have a lot of ideas on that, but really it came down to wanting to create my version of Morticia Addams. She's had a lot of different interpretations. I think she's worn a lot of different outfits, but a couple core themes have pretty much always been there. It is almost always a floor-length black dress. Typically, it can be in a mermaid style. There's just a little bit of flare at the bottom. She has bell sleeves or drapey little bits coming from her sleeves, because the original Morticia from the 60s did not have the big bell sleeves. She just had kind of little strips of black fabric, and then it was in the 90s movie where you start seeing it become more of the bell with the little strips of black fabric, and the Wednesday picks up the big bell sleeves. I'm not entirely familiar with the animated Morticia depictions that much, but I kind of want to combine the coloration that I really like with my favorite version of Morticia and come up with something that's really pretty and really cool. And I also have entirely never done anything like this before. Yeah, I sewed a suit from scratch, but a suit's a lot more forgiving than a form-fitted mermaid dress. So I'm going to start with the undergarment, which is a corset, which I've never made before. However, Sarah Spaceman has tons of videos on making corsets, as well as some other creators, and I'm going to use a technique I've done before, where I'm going to take a piece of clothing that I have and use it as my basis for a pattern. So, all of that rambling out of the way, let's get to making that pattern. So, this is the piece of clothing that I'm going to use as my pattern base. To not deal with parchment paper, I'm going to talk you through how I'm analyzing it a little bit now, and then I'll show you how I'm drafting the patterns. So, there's a few important things. Obviously, these are the boning channels, and we have 4 across the front, and then there's 2 in the back, 1 on each side. This does not appear to have any boning in the side, exact side seam at all. That's fine. So one of the things with a corset, especially when you design it, is typically your boning channels are made out of your seam allowance. So you need to understand where that actually sits and where it was designed. And luckily, there's actually a really easy rule of thumb. Typically on the front of a garment, you press all of your seams towards the center front, and on the back, you press all of your seams towards the center back, and you can actually see that here. So this is a piece from Disturbia. It's pretty expensive, but I'm really happy with it. I love it. It's covered in schmutz because it's on my table, but what we have here is you can tell, because of the deeper ridge on this side, that this is where the seam was actually sewn to get these two pieces together. And this just looks like a top stitch on the other side where then the boning was inserted. So I can see that technically my center front panel includes the width of these two boning channels, because the seam between it and this piece is on the outside here. So when I design the pattern for my center front piece, I'm going to make sure that I mark it on the outside of my boning channels here. And when I design this piece, I'm going to mark it on this side of this one, but on the outside of the other, because just like there, you can see that is definitely the ridge where these two pieces were sewn together, and this is where the boning channel was. So this just analysis is going to impact, you know, how I design my pattern pieces from it. I have to make sure that I put them on the right side of the boning channel so they all end up the right size. There's typically intricacies like this for almost any pattern you look at. So unfortunately, you do sort of have to understand how to construct the garment before you use it as a pattern, which is why a lot of people who use this method actually just fully take apart the piece of clothing they want for a pattern. I don't want to do that. That's a lot of work, and I really like this, so I am not going to do that. However, that is something that is very, very common, is taking apart your target item, because then the pieces of fabric themselves are your pattern. And so here, just as a final one, what you can see is our seam was sewn here, and then it was pressed that way, and so my boning channel seam was finished on that side. This does finish with a zipper. I do plan to use a dress with a zipper, and again, this top fits me perfectly. So hopefully by using this as the basis for my pattern, I don't really have to worry too much. I did buy enough of the fabric to make my corset that I can make two in case I screw up the first one. So I do technically have enough to do a practice, but yeah, that is how I am analyzing this and gonna make my pattern. So when it comes to drafting patterns, personally, I use parchment paper. I just happen to have this in most plentiful abundant. You can also use butcher block or pattern paper, but if you do use parchment, one of the most important things to do is crinkle it. Why? Flat parchment paper is really annoying. It doesn't tend to lay where you want it to go. It can be very static responsive. So if you crinkle it, it just becomes a lot easier to manage, and so I would always recommend crinkling it, but you do want to then make sure you lay it out as smooth as possible so you aren't actually introducing any of those crinkles into your pattern. Again, this ended up being a very, very easy process for this piece because the boning channels meant that the seams were really, really defined. For other times I've done this, it's taken a lot longer because I had to be far more particular about where my seams were and making sure they were in the right spot. Something you always want to do before you finish with your pattern piece is mark where the grain line should be. Typically for a bodice, it is vertical unless you're doing something intentionally cut on the bias. The grain line is always going to be parallel to the selvage edge of the fabric, and you then also want to label your piece. When you lay all of your pattern pieces out together, you may not remember which one is which, so when you finish it, label it. Any other markers that would be helpful too, you want to make sure you label those as well. If there's any specific identifying features, like if you have a dart, you want to make sure you label the dart. If you have the armhole, I would put an arrow to where the armhole was and indicate which side it's for. That'll just help you kind of keep it straight later. If you patterned the left side, label it the left side so you know that the reverse would be the right. Kind of sounds like common sense, but trust me, labeling things more than you think you need will always help you in the end. So I have all of my pattern pieces cut out, and I actually did a really good job this time. And I do think it's because my base garment being a corset, it was much easier to actually follow these seam lines versus some of the other pieces, like when I was patterning my Beetlejuice jacket and using a jacket that I had, following some of those seam lines, especially when the fabric was so fine, was really, really hard. And so I ended up having to redo a couple of those. I only had to trim this one a little bit. I do think from where that the sides have stretched, and so the seam on the side, I really couldn't get it to lay perfectly flat on one side, which I think will hopefully be okay. But this piece matches up really well with it, and so I think I've just trimmed, you know, a little bit off the side. But when I flattened it out, because you have to account for the curve here, it ends up exactly where it needs to be. I'll have hopefully a little bit of wiggle room if I do need to adjust things before I stitch them down and put the boning in, because I do have relatively thin boning. So I will be cutting all of these basically I'm going to fold my fabric in half and cut out 2 layers at once, because these are going to be exact mirrors, except for this piece. This is the center front. This will get cut out once, and it's not, so I'm having a little bit of a debate. I do think I'm going to fold this pattern piece in half and make sure that it's actually perfectly symmetrical on either side, because I do think there's been a little bit of unevenness in how I cut it, so I want to make sure it's as symmetrical as possible. But I also want to change the neckline. So we're not going for Elvira levels of V-neck, but I do want a little bit of a V in the front instead of just the scoop neck that this currently has. And based on the way this is designed and like where the neckline sits, I don't actually think I have to modify these side panels. I think I just have to modify this to come down into a nice like gentle point right there. And I think that'll be really pretty, but I'm not worried about that at this point, because that will be removing fabric, not adding fabric, because I like where this sits already. And so really you can almost see a line here, but essentially come down probably about like a nice little gentle V there. I think that'll give it a very nice top and presence, and just feels right for this garment for me. But yeah, I am at the point of being ready to cut fabric, with one probable stipulation that I forgot I haven't actually checked yet, is I do need to actually lay these over the front and back of this piece and actually make sure that those straps are long enough so that I know how long to cut them. This top has a unique construction where it has a buckle, so it is not a continuous strap all the way over. I will probably be doing my arm seam, you know, up at the top of the shoulder. So I just need to make sure that these are done accordingly so that that ends up the right length. But yeah, I'm actually, things are going surprisingly well. I was about to say unfortunately well. The fact that these were really, really on point my first try. Maybe I'm just getting better at it. Maybe it was the boning. I'm not entirely sure. I'm almost a little sketched out by it because it was such a success. But we will see. So yeah, I gotta make sure I have enough in my arm straps, but then I am ready to cut out my fabric. And I will be only cutting out the coutil, which is the base cotton that I will be using. So I was really right to check this, because if you see right here, so I have this piece lined up as my back, I have this one on top, and as you can see, I have a whole almost inch, if not a little bit more, on either side that would not be accounted for in this base pattern, assuming it meets basically perfectly up at the top. So yeah, I just need to take that into account, and then I'm ready to cut some fabric. Okay, so I have all my pieces cut out, and I bought a bunch of these little sewing clips to use sometimes in change of pins, and I'm just kind of clipping my pattern to that. One of the things I did is I actually cut my center front panel on the fold. That way I could be super sure that they were as symmetrical as I could get them. And if you'll notice that they're a little bit bigger, it's because there is built in, you know, I have my seam allowance kind of incorporated. Everything seems to kind of line up. Then this one goes there. Those pieces ended up about the same, which is what they should, with the assuming that I kept my seam allowance consistent. And then there is my back panel there. So what I'm going to do for my boning channels, I'm going to put, I think I said earlier I was going to use my seam allowance. What I meant by that is that's where I'm going to put my bones. I'm going to use the seam allowance kind of for that. And I'm currently in a debate of if I want to double bone everything, which basically means one bone on either side of the seam, or if I just want to do single bones. The original top is single bones. However, this is going to be a full gown, and I'm only using spiral steel boning. I didn't buy flat steel boning. I don't want to deal with cutting flat steel boning. So I'm just going to use spiral steel, which means it's not as strong. So I do think I'm going to double bone most of these seams. Now, this is not twill tape. Typically, you'd want to use twill tape. It is cotton binding. I'm hoping that this will work because I really don't want to wait for twill tape to come in. Another thing, so when you deal with corsets, you can have any number of layers. I don't know if I've talked about how I'm planning on layering this yet, but basically I'm going to have a red lining, my coutil, and then an outside fabric. The plan is, though, basically I'm going to have this bodice in all of these layers, in my coutil, in my black, and in my red. And once I have all of that, I believe, honestly, I may just go ahead and try to sort. I'm having a couple debates because I kind of want to just sort the neckline out and get it sewn, but it depends on how I do. I guess like having the dress is going to be a lot easier. Because once I have this, I might do the sleeves to kind of figure that out. This is a lot of I'm completely making it up as I go. So apologies if this one feels a lot more rambly than normal. It is. It truly is. And editing this is going to be a nightmare. But I'm going to go ahead and I think sew all of these together and basically get my corset to done. But I also think I'm actually going to go ahead and cut out these same pieces out of my red and my black fabric so that I have them and can basically get all 3 layers. But I should probably wait on that until I get this done. Yeah, okay, I've talked myself into it. I'm gonna sew this together, make sure this fits me before I go ahead and cut it out of my red and black fabric. So yeah, all of that to say, I'm going to sew all of this together, and it might be a little bit of a nightmarish process, but I'll show you what I can. So I just want to shout out, I bought these little clips recently. I bought them actually for the explicit intention of this project. I thought they might work better with the lace later. But they're also having an actually really nice benefit of, 1, they're easy to take out and I'm not stabbing myself. But 2, when it comes to some of the seams on this, they're very curvy because, you know, bust seams are not flat. And it's actually allowing me, I feel like it's better holding the fabric on the curve without causing holes or weird tension issues. So that's been awesome. I've sewn this one down. I'm just working on the other front panel. And then I'm saving the most complicated seams for last. I have the 2 side seams done on both sides, and this is attaching the side to the center back panel. So I've done basically assembled the 2 pieces separately. So these are all clipped and ready to go because the most obnoxious seam in this, should I maybe have started with it? I don't know, is going to be this one. It is the most curved seam that exists on this. And it's going to be a little bit of a nuisance. So I figured I'm going to get everything else nice and aligned, make sure all of my pieces line up beautifully before I deal with that. Is that the approach I should have? I don't know, but mostly I'm recording this because these are awesome. However, this box of 50 was like $45. It was almost essentially $1 a clip. So they are the Clover brand, which I know is notorious for being a little bit expensive, but it was the only one that actually had like 50 of them at Michael's. So yeah, I love these. They're just a little expensive. But anyways, sewing time. But anyways, unofficial review, not sponsored. I like them and they're cool, but I cannot honestly endorse them because that feels like so expensive for tiny clips. So anyways, I am so happy to report that this actually fits. There is a little bit of weirdness around some seams that I fully expected, which is these seams right here. However, I am trying it on over a shirt and, you know, basically a fully padded bra, which is not what I'll be wearing with this item. So I'm really not too worried. This fits. The sleeves are actually basically perfect. Everything is great. This is genuinely, I think, the most consistent I have ever gotten my seam allowance ever. So I'm very pleased with that. And the next step is to sew in boning channels. Okay, so because this isn't really what I'm supposed to use for boning channels, I'm modifying it a little bit. So this is the size of spiral steel boning that I have, and it actually fits across one of these twice, which, and I did verify that in this. I decided to do my side seams first because I figured if I was going to screw it up, I'd rather do it on the side or the back than I would on the front, especially because those are finicky. So not looking forward to those. But besides the point, I may also approach those differently. We'll see. What I can do with this is as follows. So what I've done is it's sewn down 3 places. It's on either side, and I did that with this side of the stitching, this side being up with the top stitching so I could get it as close to the edge as possible. And then I went back on this side and stitched it as pretty much down the center as I could. And with that, what I get, yes, these need caps, and no, it's not cut to length. I'm literally just testing this with either side of the spiral steel, which is like a little bit unhinged, but it's working, so it's whatever. What it means is I get 2 boning channels right there along the side seam, and it gets a good bit of support. I'm gonna worry about cutting all of these at the end, but I really did want to test it and make sure that it was going to fit well. And I think that's a nice way to make sure that I don't use, because imagine how much of this I would use if I did one on either side, especially when I don't have to, when these already fit. So even if my seams are a little wonky, my spiral's still boning, I have enough wiggle room that I can get it to fit. So something that I've done though, is this is essentially large bias tape. And what that means is it's designed for you sew one edge to your fabric. Basically, if you were to finish it, you'd sew it just like this, and then you'd fold it on up, and you'd sew it again along that edge. And what that ends up with is you have a really nice, pretty finished edge. Not what we're doing, not what I want. So what I actually did is I kept 1 full half, and then I cut this piece here. I think I'm in frame. Nope, I'm not. Okay. I kept basically 1 full, so there's 4 sections, right? I kept 1 full half. And then in this one, I cut it about halfway, a little bit closer, because I tucked that, just to kind of give myself a good frame of reference. I actually tucked that under my seam allowance and then folded it over. So one of the ones I'm going to work on next is the back seam. And some of these, at least all of my straight seams, I'm going to put double bones in. My curved seams, I'm debating how much of a nightmare that's going to be. So I'm going to get as much practice as I can. So I'm going to move my wad of spiral steel boning out of the way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this out and I'm going to cut my channel. So I'm going to lay this. I want to be, because this is a little bit weird, you have to kind of keep in mind your seam allowance is going to curve. So I really just need to worry about matching that corner up there. And there's a little bit of bending with this one, not too much. And I'm just going to take it to the bottom and cut. My bone is going to end up being shorter than this anyways, but that's okay. And so now we will trim this. So it doesn't really matter which side whatsoever, but I'm going to take it and basically just kind of follow. Is this the way you actually do boning channels? Not really. Am I hoping it's going to work because it's sandwiched between so many other layers of fabric? Yes. So this is why I kind of decided to do a floating lining. I thought dealing with too many layers on the inside, because the nice thing is my other fabric is satin, and I'm very much worried about it fraying a lot. So my hope is that all of the weird manipulation and learning this pattern I'm going to do with the coutil, which is nice, and like it doesn't really fray, it just keeps itself together. But essentially, what I do then is I'm going to tuck this under that seam allowance edge there and just fold it over on top. And so what this is essentially doing is now I have that I'll get full contact with no extra seam against the black, so it'll be nice and smooth in here, whether I end up slipping my bone in here or actually in the cotton there. And yeah, I will just go ahead and sew that down. One of the biggest things that is going to be different about this seam as well, that is going to help me out a lot in this next step, is I'm going to snip my seam allowance. And so that means basically where it's buckling here, I'm going to snip along this, and it will help it lay flat and flush. And arguably I'm going to cut out some little triangles to remove some of that bulk and that overlap. It's just going to make it sit a much nicer, and especially being in a boning channel, you know, basically that's going to be covering this up. I want to make sure that I don't have more bulk there than intended, because I'm already going to be putting a good bit of bulk in it. That's again why I cut this in half. Like, it's going to be bulky, but I'm trying to not make it absurd. So the astute, I know my face is not in frame, that's fine. The astute among you, however, may recognize that this looks a little bit different than what was in that last clip. I don't know what I have included as far as the previous work with editing, but I put that other top finally on the dress form and realized, I mean, it fit, but it didn't fit in the way that I think it needs to for this dress. So I made some changes. One, I've given myself a lot more room to play with here in the back as far as a zipper closure. I was getting a little anxious with how tight it was going to be. And now I have more than my seam allowance and I have a little bit of wiggle room. So that was just a very simple change. Another thing, I repatterned 4 out of the 5 pieces essentially that make up one side. This is one panel. So I redid the center front, I redid this one, I redid this one, and I redid this one. The biggest reason is it didn't quite fit the form the way I wanted. And I also realized that my dimensions are larger than I had really taken into consideration for in a particular area. And so in order to really hug that, because if you look at the side profile now, it gets a really nice shape to it, I had to change it a little bit. And so one of the biggest things is basically I moved this princess seam up because when I put the other one on, there was a big gap here, because I was using it for a different purpose than the original top. So I don't think that pattern is really wrong, but it's only accurate if I'm trying to make another one of that exact same top, which I should have known. I really should have like planned for the first one to be a mock-up. I just had confidence, probably arrogance, but that's fine. So instead, what I have now is before it needed a dart, and the way to fix that is move the princess seam to more accurately have the top of the princess seam be the apex of my bust. And so that's what we have now is this princess seam goes over just about the fullest part of my bust and then comes back down. So there's a few like lines and stuff here still, but notice there's no need for a dart or anything there. So that meant that this piece changed, and I shifted, obviously this piece got shifted over this way some, and I moved this more to kind of keep, otherwise it would have ended like, and I just thought that those two seams were too close together. This is also inside out right now because I was pressing the seams. This is such a curved seam. I pressed it on my dress form because I don't have a tailor's ham. So pressed it on my dress form. But so I shifted basically this seam over a little bit and also more towards the center. I have cut the V into the neckline. Obviously it'll end up a little bit lower because of seam allowance. And then I decided to make the bottom of this a V as well. I think that'll lead to a very nice, waistline in the front. And yeah, at the back panel, I also tilted. So originally the pattern just went straight up, and that again left a weird kind of pocket in the back. So I tilted that over. So it should now sit off the shoulder really nicely. I extended it in this dimension. I made this top part wider because I realized where it ended previously is where the seam allowance, like where the seam should be. So I didn't really have seam allowance. So now I have seam allowance, and I'm okay with a very wide set neck. So this is going to be exactly where I want it to be. I still might cut the back down a little bit. I have measured it out. I have a 22-inch zipper. We're going to hope that's long enough. I do think I need to lower this by like an inch or so to really make sure that the zipper will get over the widest part of my hips. But I'm just going to cut that into a V to mimic the front. That'll be really easy. So I'm not worried. But now I have a pattern. It fits her so much better. I'm really happy with it. And so now I'm going to sew in my boning channels and do everything that I already did again. And I'm going to keep working on the bodice. But yeah, here is the updated. I didn't film any of the pattern drafting or anything because I was also slightly losing my mind and worried that this entire project was going up in flames. So I figured I would just get to the end product and see kind of how that worked. But if you have questions on how I adjusted my pattern or kind of approached making those alterations, let me know in the comments down below, and I will either answer it in text or maybe I can make a follow-up video kind of covering some more of those details. But regardless, we now have a much more accurate pattern and are going to keep moving forwards. Again, I know I'm not in frame. Don't worry about it. So what I have now is all 3 of my layers for the bodice. I have the satin ones have not been ironed yet, so forgive what my seam allowance looks like. But I have the black layer that goes on the outside, and this was done using the exact same pattern as the base. I just have to, actually, hold it in place, and it gets all nice. There's one, I re-sewed these princess seams so many times. This one is good. There's a little wrinkle. It's like right there. I'm really hoping it's not super visible underneath the lace on the outside. And then this is the lining, but for visual purposes, I'm just gonna put it over the black one. And this is the lining. Does this dress need a lining? No. Did I want a lining? Yes. This is where the inspiration from that Wednesday Morticia is coming, because you can see the red inside her bell sleeves, and I thought that was really pretty, so I'm doing it in this gorgeous red color. So what I'm not doing next is sewing all 3 of these layers together, and then there's a few reasons why. One, with the lace layer on the outside, I do still need to sew it into the neckline, and I haven't decided how I want to finish this, because my original thought was sew it and then, you know, flip it. So basically I'd sew this layer like this, and then it would get flipped to the inside, so it would be the lining, and you'd have that on the outside. But in order to do that, I need the lace like fully established so it gets sewn in. So my other option is finish it with a bias binding. I don't know if I don't know how that's gonna look, and if I want that with this, I might trim this down a little bit more if I do a bias binding, because that basically means this is going to be the top of where it is, and it may even be higher, versus if this is a seam allowance, it'll end up a little bit lower. So there's a few, you know, intricacies with that. So what I am going to do next is the sleeves. And while I did not need the bodice pieces fully cut out for drafting the sleeves, I did need them for eventually sewing it. And so what she has, what I'm going to be going for, is like bell sleeves, where it essentially swoops. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. You can either do a seam at the elbow and then swoop, or you can just cut the fabric. I, in my Philippa Giorgio, basically did this for her sleeves for her cape, and I just kind of swooped it. So we're gonna do about the same thing there. However, I did use a website called sewist.com. I don't know if it's the Sewist or just Sewist, but basically you can click through options that you want for certain garments, and it'll generate a pattern for you. So you can pick the neckline, you can pick sleeves type, you can pick how you want the princess seams done. You can do a lot of stuff. I went through the whole process literally just to get sleeve patterns, because they have 2 different sleeves that I was interested in, so that I can get a better understanding of the geometry and layout, because I really don't want to be wasting my satin fabric, and the patterns are only like $1 or $2, so I spent $2, got 2 patterns, and they are also on sale right now, so I think it was like $3 for 2 patterns. Typically each pattern is like $2, but I spent a little bit of money, got those patterns, and I'm going to be using those as a guide for creating my sleeve. The challenge is going to be making sure that the sleeve cap fits here as it should, and that the sleeve flounce hits where it should there as well. Because the main reason I don't want to do an elbow seam is I think it's going to look nicer with the lace to not have it, so I don't want to do it for the underlayer. I think it'll just look nice and make my life easy. So once I have that in place, once I have those drafted, I will sew the black sleeves to the black satin and the red sleeves to the red satin, and we will be good and golden to get going on the skirt. I am working on the bodice because this makes me feel like I know what I'm doing before I get to the part that I have no idea what I'm doing. So yeah, next step is sleeves. Also, I did want to share that the corset layer has all of its boning channels sewn in, except one. I am still trying to figure out the last boning channel that's going to have to go in is on basically where the zipper is going to sit. I just need to read the zipper instructions and figure out how much like seam allowance I actually need for. I bought an invisible zipper, and I do know that installing those is a little bit different than a normal zipper. I have installed them before. I don't think I've done it properly. They've been visible, so you know, it is what it is, but I'm probably just going to put my very last boning channel probably right about here on either side, so that I have enough room to, you know, stitch this up still. And if you'll notice, again, I'm still sticking with the idea that all of these are going to be double boned. We'll see how that goes. These ones were an absolute nightmare to put in because they are on a very severe princess seam. So, you know, there's a few little hiccups there, so I might need to hand tack some of that down. An iron helped immensely in forming these, in getting these boning channels over the curved areas. I basically pinned it to the dress form like this and kind of steamed and ironed it and coaxed it into place, and it made stitching it down so much easier. It is not the prettiest stitch work that I have ever done. Some of these straight ones, like, I'm pretty proud of how nice and narrow some of those are. But these curvier ones, it definitely got away from me a little bit. Because, I mean, it's structured and it's a 3D shape that I'm forcing into a 2D thing so I can sew it. So that proved a little bit challenging, but I did just want to show that all of the boning channels are in this piece. No bones in yet. I have to measure and cut them, and all of my bones will be probably a good finger, like, shorter than where these boning channels rest, because I want to make sure that I don't accidentally sew them in anything else that I will be doing. But yeah, there are the boning channels on the corset.
Hi, I know I ended those last few clips as if the sleeves were coming in this video, and if you've guessed by the runtime, they aren't. They will be in the next video, drafting, creating, and sewing those on, as well as whatever I get to next with the skirt. But if you like this video, thank you so much for getting all the way to the end of it. Please let the algorithm know that maybe other people would be interested. Hit like or subscribe. Leave a comment down below. What do you think? Who's your favorite version of Morticia? What do you think of my proposed interpretation? And I hope you stick around to see how the process is going to go. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.